Hello and a warm welcome to another edition of To The Point. On the show this week, a special guest, Srikanth Kondapalli, who is a distinguished fellow and a professor in Chinese Studies at JNU, that is Jawaharlal Nehru University. Welcome on To The Point.
Thank you.
We'd like to begin with you on the recently held 19th Party Congress in China. Many are saying that it ushers a new, it's almost like a dawn of a new political era. Can you put the things in perspective as to what the significance of this party congress has been and how does it begin a new era in China?
The 19th Party Congress is a very significant event for a few reasons. One, for the first time, unlike the other previous 18 party congresses, this Congress had laid down a long-term plan till 2050. That's where the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, which was established in 1949, will be observed. So this is a long-term plan at a time when globally every other country is going from 1 year to the other year. There is a long-term plan that China had made, the new leadership had made in the 19th Party Congress. So that's number one, which basically means that there is a concerted action that is being planned for the what they call as the two centennials. One is the 2021 Communist Party 100th anniversary, because the Communist Party of China, like the Communist Party of India, were established in 1921, and so this is the first 100th anniversary. While they have also had a medium-term planning before. For example, in the 16th Party Congress in 2002, there was the medium-term planning till 2020, where they wanted to build a well-off society, roughly the standards, the economic standards, the per capita income, the social welfare benefits of roughly of European standards. Say about $25,000 to $30,000 per capita income. Now they have reached $10,900 per capita income, which is still good enough because of the 1.4 billion people that China has. To that extent, I think they have increased the per capita income.
But when it comes to the political stature of President Xi Jinping, he has almost been exalted to the status of Mao Zedong. Many people have started comparing him, and many even are saying that he has surpassed even Mao Zedong.
This is quite interesting, because when he took over in the 18th Party Congress in 2012, in October of that year, he hardly had any such positions. He was the vice president before, then became president. But today, as somebody said, he is the chairman of everything. Chairman of the party, chairman of the Central Military Commission, chairman of the National Security Commission, chairman of the Comprehensively Deepening Reforms, which is basically an organization for the opening up and reform programs. And then currently he is also the various other bodies that he had floated. So chairman of everything meant that he had full control in the last, say, 4 or 5 years in the aftermath of the 18th Party Congress. So as a result, he had amassed so much of powers personally and institutionally. And so the pushing of in the party constitution, the Xi Jinping thought of socialism with Chinese characteristics in the new era. I think this is quite remarkable because Deng Xiaoping theory was included in the party constitution in 97, only after Deng Xiaoping passed away. But when Mao Zedong was around, his Mao Zedong thought had been included. Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, that was a huge mouthful during those days, and they used to praise this as well. So to that extent, I think he had replicated the Mao phenomena.
Is it also the kind of elevation which President Xi Jinping is seeing at the moment? Is it also a clear signal to all the officials across China that, look, you just cannot contradict his policies, his position? It'll almost be like an ideological heresy.
When Xi Jinping was the party secretary in Fujian province in the early 90s, he gave an interview, a very rare interview, to a Hong Kong journalist. Generally, Communist Party members don't give interviews and recorded interviews. In this interview, he said, if I'm taking over as the party secretary of a province, which is like a chief minister in India for a state. That kind of position party secretary means. If I'm taking over as a party secretary, I will follow for the past 2 years, for the next 2 years, what has been prepared by my predecessor, and then I will include some of the new programs in the next 3 years of my tenure. So in other words, he said that it is they follow in the Leninist practice, they follow what the previous party secretary had done. So there is that continuity, of course. And as a result, in terms of your question, we find that there is the continuity which is exercised, even if it is personally very degrading or demeaning for various party officials across the board. They still follow because it's a party line, and through the Leninist practice of democratic centralism, they have usurped all these powers, all these practices, and a kind of imposition across the board once they have decided on some of these policies.
But during Mao's eras, we've read about stories how there used to be those little red book of quotations which were there for mass consumption. Though we don't hear of those kind of books currently after this party congress, but people are saying that his ideology, his thought process is going to infuse the ideology in schools, in media, and the government agencies.
Absolutely. Like as you mentioned, the red book, little red book, which was circulated, and it was some 20 or 30 million copies have been sold of that book during the Cultural Revolution. Many of the Red Guards used to carry those, and I myself have some of those little red books as part of an academic study. Xi Jinping, interestingly, when Mao was alive, these books were published to glorify Mao. And unlike Deng Xiaoping, whose selected works came after his death, unlike Jiang Zemin, whose selected works came after his retirement in 2002, unlike Hu Jintao's books were never published, speeches were never published, the immediate predecessor of Xi Jinping. Unlike all these leaders, Xi Jinping in the first term itself got his governance issues in China, that book published, and across the board they are promoting that book like anything, like the Little Red Book. Secondly, they published also a book, Poverty in China, Poverty Elevation in China. So governance and poverty elevation, these two books are in huge circulation.
So from what you're saying, I understand that it's almost giving a historical stature to President Xi Jinping, and it also gives him a doctrinal status which we have seen in the past with Mao and Deng.
Absolutely. I think some of the ideas, for example, governance, poverty elevation, these are anti-corruption, cyber warfare, also, the reorganization of what they call comprehensively deepening reform. All these have now become buzzwords everywhere. And if you don't sing this song, you won't get promotions in China.
Okay. But the party congress approved a very clunky phrase this time, and that is Xi Jinping thought for the new era of socialism with Chinese special characteristics. It's almost like 16 words which have been used in this phrase. But the meaning looks very opaque. Of course, apart from the long-term planning, what does it actually mean? Can you just decode it a little for us?
Socialism with Chinese characteristics was brought by Deng Xiaoping in the 1970s. Basically trying to say that we need to have our own kind of socialism, meaning thereby that it should not follow the Soviet practice, it should not follow the other nations, but based on the Chinese conditions.
Okay.
So basically what they try to do is to increase the reform and productive forces, basically market mechanism. So you have the market mechanism, but parties control. In other words, at the base areas, you have all the capitalists. At the top of them is the Communist Party controlling all these structures.
Okay.
Unlike in India, where you have a Stalinist, kind of doctrine, and many of the Communist parties are bereft of any capital kind of influence. On the other hand, in China, the Communist Party admits capitalists, by the way. And Jiang Zemin in 1997, he admitted 2 lakh capitalists into the party. And he said that the Communist Party actually represents the productive forces, which basically means capitalists. So this is actually a very heresy in the Marxist practice.
Right. But with almost amassing Mao-like stature, do you also see President Xi Jinping going beyond his usual 2 terms? Will he have that kind of an influence also maybe for the 3rd term when such a long-term vision planning is there? So do you see him living beyond his usual 2 terms?
Two things. One is that he had followed the party norms broadly, which means one of his colleagues, Wang Qishan,
Right.
the former Politburo Standing Committee member, he is 69 now and he retired. The requirement is, the qualification is you have to be 68 and below to become a Standing Committee member of the Politburo. Since Wang Qishan had crossed the age limit, he did not promote him to the next 19th Party Congress Politburo Standing Committee. So people suggest that since he followed the party norm of the retirement age, although party norms are not really binding on the leader, and to that extent I think the speculation that he may get a 3rd term or even a 4th term or even what they call as a life term till his passing away, like Mao did. So some suggest that possibility. But we don't see
And also
right
given
now.
the fact that most of his loyalists now are part of the Politburo also. So that is also giving credence to that speculation.
Exactly. Out of 7 members in the Politburo, apart from himself, there is Wang Huning, there is Zhao Leqi, there is Li Chanshu, there is Han Cheng. All of them are supportive of Xi Jinping.
But
It's only Li Keqiang who has one more supporter, that is Wang Yang. So in other words, out of 7, 5 votes belong to Xi Jinping, only 2 belong to Li Keqiang, if we assume any difference between the Politburo Standing Committee.
But what happens supposing if he doesn't get a 3rd term? Then does he remain as a figure who exercises influence on the policy matters of China? Do you also see that happening?
Absolutely. I think the Xi Jinping thought in the party constitution provides for an eternal position for Xi Jinping.
Right.
He can drive legitimacy by being a party elder after his retirement, assuming he retires in the 20th Party Congress. So he still gets, like Mao, he still gets that legitimacy for eternal. We are assuming again that the Communist Party is going to be eternal in China.
But we've been reading time and again how China has also been wanting to become almost on the lines of a Singaporean or a Western style of democracy. But now with the kind of political consolidation which President Xi Jinping is having, do you see this party system changing, or will it continue with the Leninist style of governance? How is it going to unfold in the coming years?
I think the party had changed substantially. It is not the same as we saw during Mao's time or Deng Xiaoping's time. Number one, as I mentioned, Jiang Zemin admitted capitalists into the party, and he had proposed what is called as 3 represents, that the Communist Party represents the broad masses. Previously, they used to say Communist Party represents the dictatorship of the proletariat or the workers, but today broad masses, meaning common people, meaning all classes, those who are in the society. Secondly, the Communist Party represents the advanced productive forces, which basically means capitalist class. Third, he also said the Communist Party should represent the advanced culture, that is Confucianism. Previously, they had the Marxist culture, but now it is Confucius culture. So, party had changed its colors during Jiang Zemin's time. That's roughly between 1989 to 2002. So to that extent, I think they have changed. The second major change that was brought in was the village level elections. Across the board in China, these 8 lakh villages or so, they conduct their own elections. That's because the party is not represented at the village level. It is represented at the county level, much like our tehsil or mandal. But the trick is here, the elected sarpanch will obviously become the Communist Party member. So regardless of what they are doing in the village level elections, the sarpanch will become the party member. So to that extent, I think the party is renewing itself in the. The Singaporean model is relatively authoritarian because Singapore today has also elections. But yet at the same time capitalism. So China is implementing with the 3 represents as well as the village level elections some kind of a authoritarian, neo-authoritarianism. Wang Huning, who became the standing committee member now in the 19th Party Congress, he wrote a book on neo-authoritarianism. That is, China should first continue modernization and then bring in doses of democracy, especially at the village level.
Right.
Probably then go up to the county level, the tehsil level. But my hunch is that there will be something like Karl Kautsky in Europe, the Social Democrats, Rosa Luxemburg, Karl Kautsky in the 19th century, early 20th century, which basically means a social democratic system rather than retaining Stalinist features, retaining Leninist features, yet China Communist Party adapting to the situation.
But how do you see the systems of control as far as media is concerned, freedom of expression is concerned? Now, the very fact that he is almost having a brute majority at the moment, if you see the Politburo, all his loyalists are there. So there are chances of him overplaying also in their hands. So then what happens to things like freedom of expression? How does media do stories? How do you see that happening?
Well, freedom of
Are
expression...
there discouraging signs for that?
Freedom of expression actually is guaranteed in the Constitution of China, the 1982 Constitution. But it's a different matter that you cannot go and speak whatever you want to.
Right.
The thumb rule in China is anything which is published has to go through censorship. So anything that you write in the papers, in the journals, in whatever, has to be. But if you are speaking, it is still, there is some amount of liberalism in accommodating those views. As long as you are not publishing, as long as you are not critiquing the party, the freedom of expression is, so there are some restrictions on the freedom of expression, regardless of their position in the Constitution. Having said that, it is true that it is an absolute state. It's only recently with the growth of the middle class, and the middle class started demanding more powers, more freedom of expression, or freedom of property, freedom of belief in terms of religion, and so on. Also demonstration. There are and property, most important for the Chinese recently. So with under the pressure of the rising middle class, the party had accommodated many of these. Nevertheless, you are right that there is the brute majority, clamps down on any dissent within China. That's an absolute. Number one, there are about 800 million netizens. And today there is so much of restriction on the netizens in China.
Because what we hear is almost groups like WhatsApp and all are totally banned. No one can use a WhatsApp.
YouTube, Gmail,
everything.
WhatsApp, even the Chinese media, that is the WeChat and the other social networking sites, are closely monitored. Right. And today you have to provide your original name, the real name, as well as an identity card. For WhatsApp and others, YouTube and others, we don't have to do that in India.
Okay. Now, if you look at the speech of President Xi Jinping in 2014, where he spoke about the new international system, whose underlying rules, of course, will be shaped by China. So now in the days to come, are we going to see a new wave of Chinese international policy invasion almost? Like how are the economic things going to really unfold in the scheme of things?
The party congress resolution is very, very important from this perspective. I think there is this the 2050 roadmap that has been provided. The foreign ministry has been asked to protect the Chinese interests abroad. Meaning today there are 36,000 Chinese companies. So protection of these companies now becomes the duty of a Chinese embassy abroad, including the one in New Delhi. Right. Secondly, about 160 million Chinese have gone abroad. So their security, especially as a lot of attacks took place on Chinese in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Libya. So that becomes the duty of the foreign ministry and the defense ministry. Thirdly, there is also the investments. Chinese investments have been going abroad substantially, some $800 billion last year. So the protection of these become key issue. But on the reorganization, Xi Jinping also suggested that the multipolar world, in other words, he wants to push through the multipolar. I think in terms of the BRICS, in terms of the Russia, India, China, in terms of the G20, in terms of the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, we will probably see more trust in these multilateral institutions because they argue for multipolarity, meaning that there are poles, there are powers to be respected. So the IMF reorganization took place, and the Chinese voting rights in the IMF have been jacked up. So that is the things that we are going to see. Instead of a TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, China is pushing through an RCEP. So that is the kind of reorganization probably they will.
And also vis-a-vis United States, like we see US going more inward, and the US government looks more distracted with Trump going haywire. So does that also give a competitive edge to China?
Absolutely. I think previously the Chinese were shy of suggesting to an alternative model, but in this 19th Party Congress, they said Chinese model could be a model for developing countries. Right. So not because the American
Jinping,
model.
I presume, has very clearly said that he wants to see China at the center stage by 2050.
That's right. So the center stage would mean basically.
And that's a clear message to US.
It basically means I want to be a hegemon. I want to be the leader. I want to be the hegemon. In polite words, he mentioned center stage, but it is basically meaning that I want to be the global leader, obviously to replace the US.
Yeah. Now, talking about the Indian context, the rise of President Xi Jinping, an aggressive and a Xi Jinping who has a brute majority, are there reasons for India to worry?
Number one, he mentioned about creating what is called as a new type of international relations, right. Which is where China at the center stage comes in. If China wants to be at the center stage, obviously other countries would get marginalized, including India, right. Including Japan, including Russia or the United States. Number one implication. Number two, he had reiterated the major powers, the neighboring countries, the developing countries, the multipolar, multilateral institutions, and soft power, which is also what is present in 18th Party Congress. Yeah. What it basically means is, as External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj, when she went to Beijing in February 2016, she said, why can't India be part of the new type of major power relations? The Chinese interlocutor said, you are not a major power yet. So in other words, it is a hierarchical system that China is trying to build, in which India has no role. India has no major.
So does that mean that India will have to revisit its policy towards China now with the political consolidation which is seen in the country? Because be it South China Sea, be it Bhutan, or maybe, for example, a Doklam-like incident, are we going to see more incidents like these?
Since the 19th Party Congress also mentioned about protection of core interests, including the territorial dispute with India, we will probably see such incidents. But in Doklam, what has happened is India stood up, and as a result, China has to back off from the Doklam Incident. What they call as disengagement of troops has happened in the Doklam. So, which basically means that since India is also a nuclear power, the cost of escalation with India will be higher. So in other words, China can go to this extent, but not to a great extent in relations with India. So obviously it has to come to terms with India in terms of power, in terms of also as an opportunity, because India has over 400 million middle class, and it's a huge opportunity. For example, China sells something like $6 to $7 billion worth of mobile phones in the Indian market.
So from what I understand from what you're saying, that China cannot have a very aggressive and a militaristic approach towards its neighboring countries, because that will impact it economically.
I think the pragmatic policy for China would be to approach the neighbors and also develop interdependent kind of relations. The infrastructure projects.
But when you say interdependent relations, I still remember when President Xi Jinping came to power, he said that he believed in friendly relations with India. But if you look at the bilateral ties in the last 5 years, we've almost seen a dip southwards. Despite the blowing hot, cold attitude which was there between the two countries. So what is the kind of guarantee that we'll see an improved relationship with China?
I think one of the things that when Xi Jinping came in September 2014 has happened is there is the strategic communication between the two leaders. Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping. So much so, Prime Minister Modi told Xi Jinping in the Hamburg meeting of the G20 that Doklam Incident should not stop the bilateral relations to be explored. And Xi Jinping has to climb down from the Doklam, kind of standoff.
As experts have been saying that there are a lot of inherent political and economic contradictions within the Chinese model. And if you look at this vis-a-vis the kind of relations which China will have with the developing world, we've seen that President Xi Jinping has almost invested quite heavily in economy, in military. These are the two institutions which have really flowered under his regime. So now, with his wish that he wants to see China at the center stage, what do you think is going to drive his ambitions? Is it going to be military? Is it going to be economy?
I think primarily they want to protect their interests abroad, which basically means that while the Chinese industry, manufacturing sector, the companies, the state-owned enterprises, by the way, in 19th Party Congress, he also mentioned that the state-owned enterprises like our PSUs,
right,
public sector units, they will be made as global competitors. The Chinese state will help these SOEs, to be state-owned enterprises, to become global entities.
But expanding the economic ambitions, is it really going to be a cakewalk for President Xi Jinping? I don't think so.
Indeed, because there are competitors elsewhere. Secondly, the state-owned enterprises are actually, they are consuming a lot of capital. They are actually in debt. Many of these are in debt. The Chinese will have a problem because in all these state-owned enterprises or small and medium enterprises, according to the Chinese law, any company which has more than 7 employees should have a Communist Party cell. Okay. So in other words, these are loyal to the party rather than to the market.
My last question to you is that one section of the skeptics is also saying that, if you look at the military composition, if the generals really go wild, it's going to be a bad time for the neighbors.
So there is also a huge churning out process that is happening within China, okay, within the PLA. So there is a lot of grouse among the Chinese military on Xi Jinping. Okay. On the other hand, there is also, with the push outside, the trampling on the neighbors could be a possibility. So they have to do a mid-course correction. For example, on Vietnam, on Philippines, on Japan related to Senkaku Islands, on India-China borders.
Right. And in fact, I think that's the biggest concern amongst the neighboring nations, that the competing claims have always been disregarded. So I think the key lies where probably President Xi Jinping will have to strike a right balance. We're really running short of time, sir. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you.
So that's it on this episode of To The Point. See you next time with another personality. Goodbye and thanks for watching.